Are we live on Facebook and everything?
Oh, I hope so. Let me double
Yeah,
check.
this has been fun times for all.
I don't recommend melon.
I am getting to where I don't recommend melon either. It's been giving us the fits the last couple of days.
Um, there we go. We are
Okay.
live. Okay, everybody. We
Yep,
are here.
we're here and we're back. And um, I don't know if we've got all the problems worked out, but let's hope so. Tonight we're on with public health nurse Stephen Briles, and uh, a long time military service in the medical field. Humana humana. He's going to go into all that, but tonight we're going to chat about uh, coronavirus. We're going
The
to chat.
jab.
Yeah, we're going to chat about the coronavirus. We're going to chat about the Delta variant, maybe the differences that are coming out with the Delta variant. We're going to talk about the vaccine, pros and cons, and maybe other treatments. And I wanted to talk about something. I want to get Stephen's input on this. Is that a year ago next month I caught coronavirus, and it wasn't a bad case. My case was literally I felt ill for I don't know, maybe a day and a half, really with symptoms, and then after that I didn't feel rough at all. But the I went to my doctor's, my personal doctor, the one I go see for all of my, health and wellness needs, and got the test at my doctor's. And then a couple days later, the state called me. And then the state called me every day after that. My doctor never called me back, which was weird to me because my doctor had been responsive and every other time that I had visited my doctor. And I kind of got the feeling like, I guess I didn't feel abandoned. I got the feeling like maybe the doctor was overwhelmed, or I kind of felt like I got forgotten about, like it didn't matter. And I'm not saying this to try to cast doubt on my doctor, but I would have expected. I had gone in to see the doctor with the flu maybe 3 months earlier than that. I caught a summertime flu. It was early onset and I had some stuff going on at work. So I went in and to see my doctor. My doctor gave me Tamiflu and then also called me 3 days later to say, hey, how'd that Tamiflu work? Did it knock it out? Everything else. And then we get a man killer virus come along. I go see my doctor. Well, first it was a Zoom call, and then I go see my doctor's aide or whoever. I don't know. They were in a spaceman suit. I don't know who it was. It was a female in a space, the whole thing, a blue suit, a blue hat with a hood and face shield. But my doctor never did a follow up. And I found that confusing. And I'm telling you, the general populace probably feels, if there's a contradiction on people getting the vaccine, it's probably because we either feel propagandized to or forgotten about. And there's a lot of confusion surrounding this. Like, it'll come out worst thing ever, worst thing ever. And then one side is almost in the same breath saying we need universal health care. But if someone doesn't do exactly what they say with their health care, getting the shot, they should die on the street. But don't you dare tell them they need to quit smoking or jog once in a while. You see what I'm saying? There's been a lot of mass confusion. And then the doctors have literally retreated from the patients. And so, as just a nominal citizen, one who's already contracted it, and maybe I just got lucky and only got a little one, or the virus I caught was weak or whatever. My case wasn't bad at all. I had body aches for 6 hours, maybe a little sniffles, and but I would have expected at least the doctor to say what is, want to follow up on that. And maybe the doctor didn't get the information from the state. Maybe everything got reverted to the state. And hold my shock if the state forgot about it, citizen. I mean, I would never imagine that happening. But that's how it's felt. And I hear that a lot from people.
So with us today, I want to introduce our guest, Stephen Briles. Stephen, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I graduated from BYU many years ago, obviously. Uh, Also did graduate work and master's in public health at University of Texas Health Science Center, San Antonio. Postgraduate work at Tooele, School of Tropical Medicine, and postgraduate work at University of Michigan in health behavior epidemiology. Uh, Worked 29 years active duty in public health and preventive medicine. Uh, After retiring from that, uh, worked in Salt Lake for a while until I took a job out at Dugway uh, as a nurse, as the public health nurse out there, and for the Utah area that's under that command. Um, so I've worked a lot with vaccines, uh, not in the development. I wish I could have. I was always jealous of a few of my colleagues that really worked on that. But in getting people to take vaccines, to uh, deciding what was good and what wasn't good, and that type of stuff. Um, as we get into this, there's a lot of opinions floating around, and both sides are at fault on some of this stuff. That's how come the very conservatives don't like some of my messages, and the very liberals certainly don't like some of my messages, because I try to stay out of the politics and just get down to the virus and the vaccine, and try and get people to get well and take care of themselves. And that's one thing I really stress is, let's drop the politics. Let's allow people to make good health decisions. They can, they have in the past, and I try best to educate the people that I work with. When we give vaccines out at Dugway and places like that, um, since the government has not mandated anything for us out there, um, we we work real hard, and some of the people get tired of hearing us educating them before they make up their mind, because a lot of times they'll come in and they say, well, I know what I want or don't want. And I said, well, let's listen to it out. Let me explain the whole physiology of it, and answer any of your questions and any of the internet stuff that you've had, and we'll go through it one by one before you sign one way or the other, and either get the vaccine or not. I don't care, but I want you to be doing informed consent. So that's where we're lying. Now, with what was it, Jared? With your experience, what I imagine happened is a couple of different things. Since I don't work on the civilian side that much, one is I know a lot of the providers out there, especially in direct providing. I used to do that decades ago as a family nurse practitioner in those days. Um, the These guys are overwhelmed, and they have their regular patients to take care of, and they probably already have a full practice. In other words, they've got appointments lined up for the next year. And then comes along a virus, and that eats into it. In the case of Corona, it hit so many people so hard that it overwhelmed them. So the state really is they're the ones that are tasked with doing the epidemiology on it and figuring things out. you would see more of your doctor if you're really sick, but if you're doing okay, uh, they kind of let you live through it, and they're praying that if you start going sour, that you get in touch with them, or emergent care or ER or something, so that they can take care of you. But they've got so many people coming through, it comes down to personal decisions as to how well you're doing. When I'm working, and I work on the epidemiology with our federal employees, when I'm working with them, I give them my personal cell number. Now, I don't go and call them back and bug them, but I explain to them when I'm doing the interviews that this is my personal cell number. Call me at any time, and we'll talk through it and see what you need, or what answers you need, and we go from there. Uh, you know, we just don't have time to do cold calls on people and see. So I trust that if they need something, they're going to call me back. And so that's probably where it's going. Now, uh, when it comes, remember I said, let's leave government out of it and let's just go with what we got. Now, obviously, the government is going to impose itself, but uh, as I pointed out way before COVID ever came out, uh, you don't want government in healthcare. Uh, People that make laws and things like that probably, for the most part, are not that great at healthcare. That's not what they're studied. That's not where their interest is or anything else. And I see a lot of panicking. I see a lot of bad decisions being made. Um, I think the principal one I see right now is the mandatory vaccines. I firmly believe in the vaccine. I'll tell you that right up front. But what I learned in health behavior, epidemiology classes, and everything else over the years and learned in practice is you get a negative response if you force somebody to do something. What we always have done historically is educate people, and they make up their own mind after that. And people usually do pretty well. If they don't listen, they don't listen. But if they get sick, they may pay the consequences for that. But that's the way it goes. Um, but if if we try to force them, we get the backlash that we're getting right now. And there's a lot of people in public health that firmly believe that. A lot of times they can't say that because they're caught up in the system per se. But we've known that for years. COVID has done more damage to the public health programs than anything else I can think of. And it's not the disease, it's the way the government has handled it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, this has been well, this has been an exercise in, when you say you don't want the government involved in medicine, I don't want the government involved in anything. I have not seen
Yeah,
a success out of them in anything. I'm telling you, if we set the government out into telling us whether the sky is blue or orange, they would fail. That's just what they do.
amen.
And again, I wasn't blaming my doctor when it was weird when and I'm sure they were overwhelmed, and I think a lot of that was a hysteria that come up around the virus coming out, the way it hit hard, and right off the bat it was made a political football by both sides.
Yes.
Those guys can't come together on anything, and honestly, I don't want to come together with them on anything either of them. I'm not a fan of either party. They're
Right.
both equally uh, uh, guilty of screwing the pooch, quite frankly.
Yeah. well, the government made it worse by getting involved and putting in all kinds of things that people had to do and regulations and all that type of stuff. So they took advantage of that. On the other side, those that already were predispositioned to not like the vaccine or not like organized healthcare and stuff took advantage of that also. And so we see propaganda coming out of both sides, uh, and the actual health and the science of it was completely lost in this whole thing.
I agree. I completely agree. And I'll be quite frank. I don't think that. I think it would have done. Uh, I don't know, science a better justice to have pulled Fauci back and thrown him in the back and advised through people
You
who.
know, Fauci is an interesting guy. Okay, that doesn't mean I endorse him. He's interesting because I've had the chance to virtually online attend some of the CDC meetings on coronavirus and on the vaccine and stuff. From time to time, I will tune into those things because I've got the links and the permission to go in on. And I've listened to Fauci when there was no news media around. Okay, so he was just talking with the scientists and that type of stuff. And he is sharp. He knows what he's talking about. On the other hand, an hour later, I will hear a news broadcast where he has cameras and microphones in front of him, and he's off in left field. It's like two different people. And so, you know, it's not that he lacks the knowledge. I think it's that he is tied up in, I don't know, whether it's his moment in fame or whether it's government and power or what. But it's not that he lacks the knowledge. It's how he presents out there and what he says when he has microphones in front of him.
Yeah, and he let the media steer him a few times. And
Yeah,
that was that
he
was
seems to enjoy that.
yeah.
And that's sad because he is a good scientist. You know, a lot of people think he's an idiot, but he's not. It's just that he seems like an idiot once he gets on in front of the cameras because he goes off into left field, oftentimes contradicting what I've heard him say in private meetings, you know, with the scientists, and they're two different people, but it's the same.
Or what he said on CNN 3 days before. He will say
Yeah,
on CNN something contradictory. And I think he did a disservice when he came out and said, don't mask, and then came out and said, okay, now you've got a mask. And then when he was
yeah.
pushed hard at it, he said, well, I had to lie to, well, no, you didn't have to lie. You could have been open and honest with people.
You know, that was an interesting one. When he first came out was before the politics kind of got into the mask deal.
Mm-hmm.
And when he said don't mask because you know that it's not going to do you any good, he was absolutely right because we had studied that for decades before, and the types of masks that these people, you know, the public wears, uh, they they're so little protection. Dave, you've worked industrial hygiene long enough to know the importance of proper mask, proper fit, and all that if you want any protection whatsoever. And you and Jared, you saw your whoever it was took care of you in a papper. You know, there's a reason they didn't come out in a regular cloth mask because it doesn't do any good. Well, it does minor good, but not enough to do anything. And so he was right then. And then he quickly changed his tune. I think either it was for his own grandizement or somebody got to him or what, I don't know. But he did an about face so fast.
It,
And
it might have just been there was a public panic going on, and it might have been something to try to ease the mind of those that were in panic.
It might have been,
But the
but we
is
got a belief that the mask is going to be all protecting, just like we got a belief that the vaccine will be all protecting. There's no reason to believe that. Vaccines are great, but they aren't, you know, the the all protecting thing that some people think they are.
it's
And
to hear someone say that. It is. Honestly, it is, because the news we're getting is that if everyone gets vaccinated, it'll just go away. Everything will be safe. And the bad thing about the mask, what it did is it gave a lot of people that are not good people a reason to get hostile with a lot of other people over something that's
yeah,
actual.
yeah. Well, one, it became a political item, but two is that when we put on a mask, it's not as bad as maybe going on online and social media, but we aren't seeing the people. We aren't seeing their expressions. We you know you kind of lose the feel for people. When I can see you face to face, I can see, if you say something, I can see the rest of your face and say, oh, okay, he's just giving me a hard time, or this is, or he's dead serious, because we pick that up naturally, and the masks started doing that, and people became a lot more hostile towards each other and losing, the the friendliness that we'd normally have with people, and the tactfulness that we might have, even if we did believe the other way. So masks did a disservice in that way too. But I think a lot of it was just, there was a lot of power type stuff. There was a lot of money out there for government, all the way down to the cities and stuff, to do what they did, and they didn't want to give that up. But that's the way it goes. Uh,
Steve, would you break down the anatomy of this virus to include what is a spike protein? Because there's a lot of people out there,
okay, yeah,
a lot of
sure,
terms out.
yeah. A virus uh, is a what, a mechanism that will infect a bacteria or a cell in your body. Uh, but to get into the body, viruses have those spike proteins, and we've all seen the animated pictures that they've drawn and stuff. And that spike protein is what hooks into certain receptors on your cells. Okay, so that's how the virus actually infects somebody. When we develop vaccines against viruses, okay, and this is specific to viruses, not necessarily a bacterial type thing. When we develop a vaccine to viruses, what we go after is this spike protein. Now, each spike protein is unique to that virus, okay, but nonetheless, its job is to allow the virus to enter the cell and infect that cell. When it infects the cell starts producing more of the virus. The virus takes over the inside of the cell. So when we develop a vaccine to protect it, it's going to block that spike protein in one way or another. Um, it'll either work on the cell itself and not allow things to go in, but most likely it's going to attach to the spike protein, and so the spike protein can't connect with the cell. So that's why you always see the spike protein. It doesn't matter how the vaccine is developed, whether it's an mRNA, one of the older fashioned type pieces of science, they're still after that spike protein to, so the body will develop antibodies to it. So if we inject the spike protein or if we use an mRNA and have our own cells produce the spike protein, the immune system learns to recognize that particular spike protein and then develops its defense against it. And that's how we cut down on disease. Now, here's the important part, is that we're all going to have viruses in us all the time. We're catching things, but most of the time we have resistance because our immune system has learned through past infections, through vaccines and other things, to recognize those and stop their effectiveness, and certain parts of the immune system will kill off those viruses also. But the most important thing, it blocks the virus from replicating. And that's what's happening with all the corona vaccines. And whether we go with, I don't care which vaccine we go after, it still has something to do with the spike protein and teaching the immune system to protect against that. So when we talk about people getting infected or a reinfection, what we're saying is the virus is in them. That does not necessarily say that they're sick, okay? Because if the viral load's real low and your immune system is blocking the viruses, then the virus can't spread and the virus can't do the damage to the cells that it normally would. So you can still have the virus in you. Vaccines and past disease and all that do not protect you from not getting the virus in. You're going to breathe it in, you're swallow it in, depending on the type of virus. But it does protect you once that virus is in there to stop the replication of the virus and stop the damage that it might do.
What's
Is that clear?
it's as clear as you can make it to a moron such as myself. No, that was a good explanation. What's the duration of the vaccines? Is this going to be? I don't know. The flu vaccine, they change it up every year according to what they're guessing is going to come. But what's the duration we're looking at with them?
I always get a kick out of it because everybody's saying, well, this is going to last longer than others and all this type of stuff. Nobody knows. We don't know until we have a history on it and see where it goes. This is a new one, okay? A good example is several decades ago, we developed the vaccine for measles. Mm-hmm. And the vaccine worked. It worked well, stopped measles dead in its track, and everybody says, we're good to go. This is a lifetime immunity. Well, in the 90s, we have all these college kids coming down with measles, and these were kids that had been raised on the vaccine, had the vaccine, and everything else. So what we discovered is that the immune system had waned by then enough that they needed a booster shot. But we didn't know until almost 20 years later that you would need a booster. It was assumed that it was a lifetime type thing, because sometimes it is on certain diseases. Anyway, so that's where it can go. The same thing goes with your natural immunity. And as far as as far as the duration, it's up to your immune system, really. And your immune system is as good as what you take care of your body. That's how come we say, eat well, get all your vitamins, get out in the sunshine, do all the things, living healthy. And that will increase that immune system response, assuming you don't have other types of immune problems that are, caused by something else.
Mm.
So,
We
uh,
complex
anytime
creatures.
somebody says, "Well, this is not going to last that long," that's a guess.
Okay. Yeah. No,
Okay.
and I get that. And uh, I don't know. I like history, and I do know that maybe not vaccines, but inoculations have been around for a long time. I think it was 500 AD in China. They were inoculating for something by using the scabs. They would grind it up and then blow it in the face of people, or
Yeah, there's been different things like that used for hundreds of years.
yeah,
I'm going to the other side of the table where I have a charging cord because
yeah,
uh,
yeah. Feel
got
free.
a okay, but yeah, it can vary depending on uh, you know things. What's interesting when you talk about, let me see, just a second.
Oh, you're fine. So, yeah, right now, he's plugging in his device, and I'm just always going to go. When this came up, I started looking into vaccines, and I found out our earliest recording that we have was it was like 500 AD in China. Um, I can't remember
And
the
I don't doubt that. I've watched the history of vaccines at least since the last few hundred years.
Mhm.
Okay.
And then, of course, we had Valley Forge, and that was
Mhm.
against smallpox, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. During the time of our founding fathers and Benjamin Franklin and stuff, smallpox was, well, it was bad before then, but they started experimenting with uh, vaccines for it. And what in the early part, they were taking a little bit of the smallpox again, like the scabs and stuff,
Mhm.
and doing kind of a skin brushing of it, and it worked. Now, we worry about side effects from vaccines. Well, those people, there was a decent, it wasn't a bad death rate. It was, you were still better off getting it because getting the vaccine, quote unquote vaccine, uh, than getting the disease because it was killing people, right and left if you got the actual disease, where the vaccine killed a lot less. So people took that chance because smallpox was such a devastating disease.
Especially for the soldiers at Valley Forge,
Yeah,
stuck in wide areas.
any you put everybody together, you were going to, somebody was bound to come in. We've had that with every disease, but you know, uh, they in England they finally noticed that milk maidens, they had ladies that milked the cows and stuff, uh, didn't have didn't get smallpox for the most part. And there's some of our early nursery rhyme type stuff talks about the fair milk maiden, and there's the nice skin she had because smallpox you know causes all kinds of blemishes. And what they were catching, which was much less invasive, was cowpox. And so they started developing a vaccine off that once they put two and two together, and went over to cowpox, and that was a much safer one. Over the years, they've developed that better and better and better. And so, but there's still dangers even in that. And that's why we don't do universal smallpox inoculations nowadays, because there's immune depressed problems which are much worse now than before because of the different drugs and stuff and conditions that people have. And if they get the vaccine, or if they are around somebody that's been vaccinated, they could develop it and go into full smallpox nowadays, or full disease, and die, or at least have terrible circumstances. So they're very selective now on who they give smallpox vaccine to, and you have to be going into an endangered area or where they think it is. So that's usually the soldiers, because that would be a terrific germ warfare thing to do with our population, since most of the population has never been inoculated. Back when I was a kid, everybody got it. Everybody has a scar in their arm where they got it. But those types of things happen. It's better and better, but not perfect.
Steve, can this new vaccine actually alter DNA?
No. If you're talking mRNA,
Yes.
the mRNA vaccines, is that what you're talking?
Yes.
Okay. The mRNA vaccine does not get into the cell nucleus where your RNA is. Okay. What happens is that they take a messenger RNA, they wrap it in a lipid, a fat type covering, or else the body would completely destroy it before it even got to the cell. Okay. And then it enters into the cell, but into the outer cytoplasm of the cell. That's the part that makes RNA that produces things like spike protein in this case. Cells produce all kinds of things. They could produce skin, they could produce different parts of the body. The mRNA lives temporarily, the cells live temporarily. They're constantly reproducing and growing through RNA. But it does not get into the RNA. The RNA stays the same and is untouched. But the cell itself temporarily is instructed. It's like a computer program. It's instructed to make the spike protein. So your own cells produce that, and that's how they do it. Now, there are some other vaccines that are not mRNA that actually do get into the DNA. I'm not saying that they change DNA. I don't know, but there's a higher probability. But with mRNA, it doesn't even get close to, it doesn't get into the nucleus itself to do anything. And so there's a big difference. So I'm very much in favor of the mRNA as opposed to the more traditional type stuff, which has a lot more things added to it, and it sometimes some of those vaccines do alter the nucleus, but supposedly it just alters the nucleus to send out mRNA to the cytoplasm, which then produces the spike protein. The final thing always is going to be the spike protein, and then the new one that's keeps saying they're coming out. That is very traditional old vaccine, and all they're doing is they've grown the spike protein somewhere else and they're injecting you with it, much like many of the old time type vaccines that we still use today. But mRNA has very few things in it. It has the mRNA, it has the lipids, and it has some buffers. It does not have preservatives, and that's why we have to keep it either at minus 20 and Pfizer at minus 80 degrees centigrade, because it can't be preserved. And once we thaw it out, we have a number of hours that we have to use it in before it would be considered contaminated.
So it's better to be first in line than last in line, is what you're saying?
It's not nearly that close.
The
But
freshest facts.
next day, let's put it that way.
Oh, I'm sure somewhere on an army post, probably a basic training post, there's some gentlemen lined up against the wall, and the guy who got it last got one that just spoiled. It's not going to do any.
If it was mishandled, it might be, but
I went to
actually,
basic training once. I remember.
good. I read of these that have been mishandled, and it's been, these different health departments or some clinic somewhere or something like that. Uh, our people, the military, insists on extensive training, and I spent a lot of time training my staff, uh, days and days and weeks, on handling that vaccine and doing it right. And you know, we'd throw it out before uh, we'd take a chance on something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the next okay, so the next question is we've got a virus. I don't know. I don't think we need to get into was this virus man-made and released uh, on a mistake, because that's right now that's conjecture, and I think
It is.
there's a lot of I mean, even whatever you personally believe, I think all that sits in conjecture land. And also, that question does not have anything to do with either of us. But I think what the question is we've got a virus that all viruses, from what I understand, from my nominal reading and watching of TV or science shows, is that they mutate often, and they
They,
generally mutate to try to make it so that the host has more survivability, because that gives that the virus more survivability. But
exactly right. Uh, the most mutations, the virus will actually weaken to a certain extent. In other words, it allows the host to live better and not making us deadly sick. But but it also normally mutates so it spreads more and faster. So
mhm.
you infect more people, but you don't kill your host. Okay, and that would be the natural progression. Every once in a while, you get a mutation that breaks that rule for one reason or another and becomes more lethal. And that's why, once in a blue moon, we see something that was a virus that wasn't that bad, and suddenly, the latest version of it is really bad. You know,
That's like if you look at the Ebola virus. It
you're
it
right.
it's had some extreme jumps and then dropped right back down. But you've got a now malaria is a virus, correct?
Malaria is a spirochete,
Okay,
which is which is a whole different thing.
now that's a whole new okay, because that one seems to be pretty constant. It
Yeah.
it I mean, it's ever pervasive. It's probably didn't they do a study that malaria is probably the number one killer of human beings in
Yeah, but that is more an environmental problem
Mhm.
than uh, a medical thing that we could solve. Um, if we could clean up the environment and clean up the mosquitoes that spread it and things like that. A good example of that was building of the Panama Canal. The Americans weren't the first ones there to do that.
No.
The French had tried and some others had tried, but they had lost so many people to malaria and other tropical diseases that it was almost a suicide mission to go down and try and build that canal. The Americans came in, and of course, they did a lot of things that were different. But one of the things that they did was actually get the mosquito population under control. Okay. And when they did that, the workers stopped dying off and they could actually get some work done. Now, you know, uh, before they got rid of DDT, we were able to control the mosquitoes that way. Other things are out there now, but DDT was probably the most efficient at doing it. Of course, it ruined other things in the environment. So it's everything's a two-sided sword. Uh, but malaria to this day, if they can clean up the environment and get rid of the mosquito population down to a reasonable amount, they can handle malaria and you can get it under control.
Yeah. I think that where I was going with that was you've heard people say that by having a virus that doesn't, or by having a vaccine that doesn't kill off the virus, which I'm not aware that vaccines normally do, that you, I don't know, that maybe you're prone to cause the virus to mutate more and mutate faster.
The vaccines do not, if we're talking virus, let's not get bacteria or spirochetes or things like
Let's
that involved.
spirochete real
If,
quick.
if, if we're talking virus, the vaccine itself does not kill the virus. The vaccine teaches the body to either keep the virus under control and or kill off the virus to a certain extent. Okay, it's up to our bodies really to handle that. It's up to our immune system. People that do well, whether vaccinated or not, say with COVID, have a better immune system. Okay, if they don't do well, two things happen. Either the immune system's not responding because they're maybe on some type of immunosuppressed drug, or their health could be rotten otherwise, or the immune system can be hyperactive, like in autoimmune diseases and things, and just go berserk and kill off the body itself.
Isn't
And that's
that
what
kind of,
happened in those early cases before
yeah,
they learned to suppress the immune system.
isn't that kind of what happened with the Spanish flu? The Spanish flu would get in there and the reaction of the body. Because well, this is from what I heard, it killed mostly younger people. It didn't have that
Yeah,
big effect on older.
certain viruses do, and I I can't tell you right now on Spanish flu. Matter of fact, I kind of smile because just yesterday I got a book on the Spanish flu, and I purposely bought it because it came out before COVID was around, so it wasn't biased by the present stuff. And I've yet to start in on that book and see the history on it. It's a history of the Spanish flu, the medical history, and so it might be an interesting read and a discussion at some other time. But you know, the Spanish flu is a flu virus, and it was a bad one. But you know, some people survived and others didn't. This goes into immunity to a certain extent too. As far as you asked, how long does it last? Well, some of these flus that have come up, even since the Spanish flu, that have come up, some of the old people weren't bothered by them. And as you look back epidemiologically, these were people that survived other flus like Spanish flu. Nowadays it's been too long, but for the most part, survived things like the Spanish flu or some of the other devastating ones that came through, and had antibodies that may have been developed 50 years, 60, 70 years ago, and it was enough like the new virus that came that they actually had some resistance still.
Mm,
Okay, it's not like it was great resistant, but it was enough to get them through it.
yeah.
So yeah, these antibodies, even when the levels are low, still can be, if you can keep a person alive long enough, the antibodies can hype themselves back up when they recognize a protein sequence that it knows already.
Steve, there's an interesting question in the comment about viruses causing toxins in the cell to kill it. Do viruses cause toxin to kill the cells, or is there another method?
That is an interesting question. I had never thought about that one. Viruses, my gut answer on that would be viruses do kill the cell eventually, but it's not to their advantage. And they kill the cell, or the cell dies because it's been reprogrammed and stuff. So I don't know if we'd call it a toxin as much as just the process of doing what it is, because the cell, the virus makes the cell into a machine to make more of itself, more of the virus itself. And in that process, all cells are going to die anyway. And it just overworks the cell and can do a lot of damage that way. So it may hurry the demise of the cell, but again, I'd have to look at toxins. It it just doesn't make sense physiologically for the virus to do that otherwise.
Hmm. This is a good conversation. This is really is. It's been flying by, but I would be remiss if we didn't get into the different types of vaccines that are available right now, what the different expectations of them are, and maybe even in the end, if you're willing to say which ones you prefer for which cases or circumstances.
Yeah, I have my definite preferences. Okay, now if we look at, let's start with mRNA because that seems to be the main thing that people talk about. Okay, if we look at the mRNA, both of them use an RNA sequence or an mRNA sequence that are exactly the same. They weren't.
What does that mean?
They,
What break that mRNA sequence down?
okay, the
Tell
mRNA sequence, think of a small computer program.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that's all it is. It's in computers it'd be like zeros and ones. In
What
this
magic,
case,
what magic did they use to make this?
okay,
It's
what they did is they looked at the coronavirus. They mapped it. It had been mapped. Coronavirus has been studied for forever, at least since SARS. So that's what, 15, almost 20 years ago. And so they had a good idea. And since the labs had been working with the coronavirus, they had a good genetic map of the coronavirus. So what they did is they took that map and the actual coronavirus never entered those labs. They didn't need it. They could genetically engineer the protein sequence into that piece of messenger RNA and do it that way. So where was I going on? Okay, yeah, both the Pfizer and the Moderna have the same mRNA because that was determined by the virus, not by the laboratories. The challenge that they had was how to inject that mRNA into somebody without the body immediately destroying it, because it's very delicate, extremely delicate. And each lab came up with their idea of how to encapsulate that mRNA, and they did it with fats. They were common fats that we see all the time, okay? And they did it with fats, and then they used some buffers and stuff to make sure the pH was right and that type of stuff. And so that tiny piece, and it's hard to imagine, but each mRNA is covered with a fat capsule. Okay. Now, some people have said, well, what's the difference between Pfizer and Moderna? And one scientist, I think, put it very well. It's the difference between, Coke in a bottle and Coke in a can. It's just how it was contained. But there are some other differences that also play into it, which has come more to attention in the last couple of months. One is that Pfizer dosed theirs at at 0.3 cc's per dose. Moderna did theirs a little bit stronger at 0.5 cc's per dose. And Pfizer put it on the booster at 3 weeks. Moderna put it at 4 weeks. Okay, now keep those all in mind. What they found out was that when they looked at the antibodies developed after a month or two, the antibodies from the Moderna were twice as many developed as in Pfizer. And it's not because one vaccine was different from the other. It was in probably what they feel, it was in the dosing and the timing. Okay. I always tell patients when they come back for a booster shot on whatever it is, okay, you come back not before a set time period. In other words, if it's 1 month, you come back not before 1 month. Now, if they want to go a little bit beyond that, I'm not worried about that. If you go too far out, yeah, you're going to do some damage. Some people don't come back for a couple of years, but because you actually allow the body to develop its immune response a little bit better by dosing a little bit later. For instance, they've talked about this third booster dose, which CDC said no the other day, except for people at risk and older people like me. And there's been a lot of debate on whether you give it at 6 months after the last dose or whether you give it at 8 months. Well, for me, I vote for 8 months.
So you want to let the vaccine run its course and
what you want to do is let the immune system develop more, and then you get a better boost. Okay. Now, you don't want to go so far out that you've lost your immunity so much that you lose sufficient protection. The same would be said if you were to give the vaccine after somebody was infected with corona. Okay, because you don't want to go too early because you won't get the results you want. You'll get a more violent reaction because the immune system will attack it to a certain extent. And that's how come, we tell people to wait for at least 6 months. Okay. But if you held it out there long enough, you've got protection out there, we know, for at least 6 months and probably a year or two. Who knows? Again, we have to have a history on it. So I'm not going to, venture out and say this is how long natural immunities last, like some of the commentators do, because we don't know. When's the second coming? Heaven knows. Okay. So anyway,
maybe it already happened and we missed it.
Yeah, probably.
Just saying.
But anyway, so it's a tricky part there in determining, and that's where research goes into all our common vaccines, is determining what is the optimal waiting period before you get boosters or whatever. Okay, and so I'm voting right now for at least 8 months out because I know the protection's good.
That's 8 after tracting.
I would say at least 6 months and probably a year or better. I don't know yet. Okay, the numbers aren't.
That's to get a third booster shot. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, to get either a boost, either get the shot because you've had the disease and you want to boost it, which gives you a lot more antibodies, or whether you get a third booster to boost your first two shot series.
Okay.
And what I'm looking at now, the reason they go say they're recommending it for senior citizens like myself is because our immune system's not as good as you guys. They're young and healthier. Okay. Same reason when I get a flu shot, I get the high dose flu shot, which is about 10 times stronger, so I can get a good uh, immunity to the flu.
Mhm.
The regular flu shot would give me some immunity, but it might not give me as much.
Now I have a 92-year-old grandmother who she got the I think the Moderna series, I believe. Which after hearing you, that makes me happy. It just sounds like it's a of the two series, it's better. She got that probably about 7 months ago now.
Mm-hmm.
They come out with the third shot. At least you're saying wait for at least an 8 month, 6 to 8 month time mark before you.
Yeah, they've been recommending six. Um, when we get into 92, her, it all depends on how healthy she is. But generally speaking, yeah, you might do it at six because she's at higher risk. She's not going to have as good of an immune system.
She's
Um,
92. She's amazingly healthy, um,
Good.
like
Yeah,
super healthy.
I have a mother-in-law that's just slightly older than that, and I know what you mean. She's all over. She drives from St. George up to visit us and everything else, and doing very well.
My
But
grandma would love to, but she never learned to drive because,
that's what the shuttles are for.
yeah.
But uh, yeah, if you kind of have to look at how healthy they are, and to determine how much of a risk. There's a lot of people that are my age, which are basket cases. And I consider myself, I'm not perfectly healthy, but I consider myself very healthy for being in my, well into my 70s now.
Mm.
And, but then, I work out the clinic, and as you've seen from my pictures, I have my sheep and I go out and work those. And I'm constantly going, get plenty of sunlight, which translates to vitamin D. And of course, I take extra vitamin D because that helps too. But, so I don't really get sick that much.
Can I ask you another question? Does having a form of livestock also, because of your interaction with probably their natural diseases, does that aid you in having a stronger immune system, do you think?
It, it may. I think it does more for very young children and stuff. Because they're developing their immune system. And when it's developing, it needs to be challenged. If it isn't challenged, if you keep them in super hygienic problems, it doesn't know how to react later on to other uh, viruses, bacteria, things like that.
Mm.
So, my kids were always out and eating their dirt and doing whatever. And it's what I've always coined as benign neglect. And they've not had much as far as allergies go. They've been very healthy. Uh, and they're in their 40s now. But yeah, and there may be some protection out there, but I think the exercise and the sunlight and those types of things does much more for me than the just the disease pattern. Although I'm probably exposed to some, of course, it probably means I probably wouldn't catch some animal disease, which I wouldn't catch anyway normally because our body temperatures operate differently and things like that. Viruses are very sensitive to temperature. Human viruses like to exists around our body temperature. If you start running a fever, in the old time, that's one way they treated them. They get people hot. You can kill a virus just by a high fever. Now, you may kill the patient too if you get it too high, but you can kill a virus. So when we talk animals, they have a different metabolism and a different deal. For instance, a normal temperature for a sheep is about 103. So the viruses that would kill most human viruses, but the viruses that would exist in the sheep do best at 103, not at 97, 98. Okay, so that's why we see different animals and different species have different diseases to a certain extent. The animals which are closest to us uh, in temperature and metabolism and all that type of stuff are more likely to spread diseases between us.
Steve, one question I have is one question I have for you, Steve, is I got the second shot. I was fine. When my roommate got the second shot, he was literally on the bathroom floor for quite some time.
Yeah,
Can you explain why it would be different for one person versus another?
that is the immune system response. Okay, and different immune systems respond differently. Yours didn't get super excited. It didn't overreact. And that's why older people like myself usually don't have bad reactions because our immune systems just aren't going to get super hyper. But if you've got an immune system that really gets a knee jerk reaction to something, then yeah, you're going to have more side effects. The vaccine is exactly the same. You got the same vaccine, I'm assuming, the same dose and all that type of stuff. So that didn't change. But the way the body reacted to it is the difference, and that's in the immune system itself. The same thing happens in natural disease. Okay, if you've got again a decent immune system, then that reacts more appropriately, then when you get like COVID, you may get sick, but you aren't going to get that bad. On the other hand, if you've got an immune system that is not running well, then you might get very ill. And it's like I said earlier, in the earliest times that we were treating COVID, we had a lot of people die not as much from the disease as the immune system reacting to the disease. And we quickly learned to suppress the immune system, and then they would survive. We just had to keep them alive long enough so that we could do that. So they gave them, immune suppressant drugs, and that made all the difference in the world. We know that now, and if they start seeing that type of cytokine storm coming along, they treat it by suppressing the immune system.
Oh, that's a. It seems like our response in the beginning was a lot of, I guess, medical practice. They were trying to figure out what to do on the way.
Yeah, you have to figure it out. There's when you've got something new, uh, there's not magical answers, uh, and that's my argument with either side. You can't just say this and that. You kind of have to. There's too many unknowns, and you know it's it's sad, but that's how we learn. And as we learn this disease more, we get better at it.
Now, one I don't know, one big question I have is it seems like there has been some treatment out there for this disease, but the treatment itself has been frowned upon by the government, by the media, and by some of the medical professionals. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the treatment, such as everything that Donald Trump went through when he had it, to this latest one with Joe Rogan, that about made Twitter sizzle up and burn off the planet. Why do you think that looking at a treatment has been so frowned upon and neglected?
It would really depend on the treatment. Some of the treatments that have been pushed have, they say, well, I took this and you know what? I didn't get the disease or I didn't get it bad. Uh, that doesn't mean the treatment had anything to do with it. It would be like me, the old thing is I'm going to click my fingers, snap my fingers to keep the elephants away. Look, there's no elephants around me, so that must work.
Yeah, it's my bear rock.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
And,
but the argument is Joe Rogan and Donald Trump took the same treatment. They're both very different specimens
yeah,
of human beings.
but the treatments they took were proven and still work very well, and and they are being used. Unfortunately, the current administration now is trying to buy it all up in the name of equity. This is where government gets in the way.
So that may be what's killing it. That may be just because
Yeah,
an entity is trying to buy it. Also, yeah, I mean, let's face it. One side of the media seems to be a lapdog for one side of the government, and
right.
that's what it feels like. It feels like if
Well,
off the jump, it was
yeah,
neglect. And if you mentioned it for a while, you got kicked off the internet. You got,
yeah. The ones that you got kicked off the internet uh, may have worked and may not have worked. Okay, uh, the, there's again we get down to the clicking, snapping of the fingers and the elephants. Uh, who knows? Uh, some of them have some serious side effects if taken incorrectly. Some just don't make any scientific sense whatsoever. Now, the ones that Joe Rogan took and Trump took did make good sense, and they were being used. The problem was is that like Florida was buying up quite a bit because they firmly believed in it, and the administration basically said, well, the rich people are getting it, but now there's not enough to go around because there's a real shortage of it. And so therefore the government's going to buy it up and evenly distribute it. It's kind of like evenly distributing your wealth. Okay. Same type of, and therefore it becomes a shortage for everybody.
now, and that's a big question. Now, the ivermectin. I don't know if that's a cure or not, but that's one of the words you're not supposed to say on the internet. So I'm about to get off or whatever. But
and that's an interesting one because we use ivermectin a lot in livestock.
well, you've got livestock, but you've also got people ivermectin. You have a pharmaceutical grade that's actually prescribed.
And if given by prescription and it comes in a pill form, it's safe. Okay, it's not going to harm you. Now, how much good it does, I don't know. It's an antiparasitic and an anti-wormer type drug. I have never seen any studies that show that it works on viruses.
Yeah, and that we don't know. But part of that is also
the
we've
problem.
been able to try it out. Have they set aside a control group of people who are willing to try it out?
I'm sure somebody has somewhere, but it's still, it takes usually a few years to develop a good study and get it to work. But the problem I see with ivermectin is the good old American thought pattern. Well, if a little bit works, a lot more will even do better.
We've got Gates for a reason. I mean,
and ivermectin is especially dangerous if you overdose. I'm very careful when I dose it to livestock because livestock with it by just slightly overdosing it.
Yeah, and that is very true. And also livestock ivermectin is made with other base materials, which is why a human being should not go down to the store or go down to the feed store and buy. I mean, everyone, we're out here in Tooele. I grew up in Grantsville. People have ivermectin all over their farms.
Yeah, I've got ivermectin less than 20 feet away from me in my refrigeration, in which I keep medicines for livestock.
Yeah, and
Okay.
some people get it by like the bucket, and it's they use it
I support it at that amount.
well, they use it like if the animal gets a substantial wound on their skin, they automatically start throwing it on there. That's their initial treatment till they can get a vet over.
Yeah, well, it's not going to cure the wound, except that it will cure the maggots and stuff that might get into the wound, okay? Because it is very good at that, at killing fly maggots and things like that, because, again, it's anti-parasitic. But, you know, there's ivermectin in a lot of things. Your dog's heartworm medication it works with ivermectin. That's the principal ingredient in there. But again, uh, don't go out and buy some at the store, you know, that's been formulated for sheep or cattle or something like that, because you'll kill your dog. The dogs are very sensitive to it, extremely sensitive to it. So the medicine that's prescribed for them in pill or form is a very minute amount, but it works.
Mhm.
Okay, and but I've seen people kill dogs by trying to say, well, I've got this for my livestock. I'll just let me. I know mathematics out. I'm going to figure out what the dosage is and take it down to that. And boy, if you're off by just a little bit, you've overdosed them.
You got to be pretty good at math to go from 40
You got
pounds
excellent.
to 35.
You should be a compound pharmacist or something to figure out the right dose. It's better just to get the stuff that's already been done. So ivermectin can be fairly dangerous if taken incorrectly.
I
It's
and I
it's a good drug otherwise.
I completely agree with that. I just feel like with the way it seems like it's hard not to build a conspiracy theory in your mind around the way the information was subdued, the way if you even say the word on YouTube, YouTube would cancel your show
Yeah.
and throw you off. It
Yeah.
almost seems like you weren't allowed to.
Have the debate.
Doctors maybe even got scared away from.
Right. Again, this is where politics gets into it, or big industry nowadays is it's all the same.
Mhm.
Uh, and I don't know if we'd call it a conspiracy as much as we would call it, you know, I'm going to take care of these poor people out there that just don't seem to understand. It's, you know, it's a, what, a superiority type deal. I'm more intelligent than you are.
And yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Is
So they do it in the light of protecting us.
our divine generous benefactors.
Right, exactly. And, you know, to a certain extent, I believe in the Darwin principle. If you kill yourself by overdosing in ivermectin, you deserve it because there's plenty of ways to get the right amount.
Mm-hmm. And okay, the next question is, what do you think about the AstraZeneca vaccine? That's a different one. That's one that is,
AstraZeneca, yes, that is a completely different vaccine, and people are always doing it. It seems to work, but it has more side effects. It's not made on the mRNA platform. It's made on a different way of making it, and I haven't liked it from the beginning. Okay, personally. That doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's just that because of the way it's formulated, we have more serious side effects with that. Uh, if that's the only one you have, I would go with it because even with the side effects, you're still better off than catching the actual disease, which is going to be much worse. Okay, the side effects are the same thing you get with the disease, only to a lesser amount.
Mm.
For instance, you're going to get the disseminated clotting. It's very possible with AstraZeneca. That was the early stuff that really stopped it. But the disease does exactly the same thing at a much higher amount, and that's how come post-COVID patients have a lot of clotting problems. Okay, and some people die after they get well from COVID from clotting. I know several people personally that have had some real problems on that side. They're finally getting better, but it was secondary to the early COVID uh, disease that they had last year. So AstraZeneca, it's okay, but I don't get excited.
Okay.
If I have any other choice, I'll do that.
What about the Russian and Chinese market?
I don't even know where to go with that because I don't see enough real science to support one way or the other. Okay. All I know is that even some third world countries are saying, whoa, uh, this doesn't seem to work in some cases, or boy, have we had problems with it.
Well, didn't the Russian model came out what 17, 18 minutes after COVID? It seemed like it came out first,
I don't know the history on when it came out, but
and all the reports was that it was, and that it was essentially nothing that aided with the virus at all.
yeah, that's probably true. But you can, if you aren't particular about how effective a vaccine is, in other words, that it works but not necessarily well, or it
That's a
may have,
soundbite right there. If you aren't
you can develop
particular,
it very fast. They do that sometimes with animal vaccines for rare cases. For instance, for ferrets and things like that, they've come up with some vaccines, and there's a couple of docs that put those together fairly quickly using old technology, but it's better than losing the whole ferret population. They've used this on rare species, and they figure, yeah, we may lose half of them, but if we didn't, we'd probably lose the whole bunch.
mm,
So yeah, vaccines like that can be developed very fast.
mm.
Steve, was this vaccine? It came out so fast that everyone's having these conspiracy theories about the vaccine. So I'm wondering, was this vaccine something that maybe was originated for SARS or something else, and they're piggyback
Well,
COVID?
the original research did get into things like SARS and stuff like that. Now, mRNA technology, uh, they say back in the 80s, but as I've tracked the history, probably about 1990 is the first, and it was a concept in those days. It really didn't get any funding until about 2000, uh, and uh, and then it was in 2008, 2010 when companies like Moderna popped up, which were some of the original researchers, and they decided, hey, but they weren't aiming at COVID as much as the technology. And for instance, Moderna has like 21 different vaccines or treatments in the pipeline right now. COVID jumped to the front because it had funding, and it costs billions of dollars to do it. And the Trump administration recognized that and funded them up front. And so they said, fine, we'll drop whatever else we're doing. We'll put everything we have into this using the technology we have.
So what you're
Uh,
telling me is because of that, the latest erectile dysfunction pill is not going to be on the market for another 5 years.
yeah, actually, the latest, there's mRNA technology, for instance, in treating hard tissue or solid tissue cancers, for instance. There
Ooh.
was one for that's in the pipeline for melanoma. There's, you can call them a vaccine or you can call it a treatment. I don't care, but essentially it does the same thing. And these are all in the lineup. HIV, there's an mRNA in the pipeline for that, and who knows whether it works. But they're all in trials, and they're being held up for lack of funding, really. So they're going very slowly. Again, COVID got funding; it moved to the front of the line. How in biotech in Germany, I'm not sure how they got their funding, whether they got it through us or through the European side. But in biotech developed the other one. They went to Pfizer because Pfizer was great at marketing and knew how to get it on the market. So they went together. But in biotech, technically did the Pfizer vaccine. Moderna's always done its own, and but it's working on a whole bunch. But essentially, what happened is you had funding. So when they did that, one was is that they knew how to put together the mRNA. They were learning how to cover it with a lipid covering. That didn't take very long. What takes time normally are trials, but they started doing the trials very early, and they backed them up as much as they could, and they did extensive trials, more so than you would under normal funding, because they had the money to do it. And so they were able to get a lot done in a very little bit of time. Uh, and I credit Trump with a lot of that because he understood how things happen. If you can get, if you're building an airplane, if you can get all the stuff organized out there and funded ahead of time, bring all the parts together into one thing, boom, you can get stuff going very fast. And that's essentially how they did this one. And so the mRNA technology went extremely fast, not because it was rushed as much as they were able to do what they needed to do with the numbers they needed to do because they had money to be able to do it. And so they had an incentive there, big time incentive to get it out.
So
And
essentially, what they were missing was the longevity test, but they had.
yeah, but
Uh,
even at that, they had better trials than most vaccines did. But most vaccines, you keep adding in patients as it goes because you only have so much funds to do it with. Okay, where they were able to get all their patients right up front, and they were able to fund that, develop enough vaccine, pay the patients whatever they paid to offset that, pay all the lab work in the hospitals and test places to do it, and these people are followed up. If you were one of those there in the trials, you're followed up all the time. They still are. Okay, most people that went through trials are being followed at least monthly, and the reason they do that again is to learn now are there any side effects that we missed, but mainly what is the antibody levels on these people, how are they doing, and that type of stuff. And so but they were able to do that and get enough trials done uh, in record time because they didn't have to wait for different things. And Trump cut a lot of the normal paperwork that has nothing to do with the quality, but everything to do with administration. You guys worked around the government long enough to know that a lot of times to get something passed, you got to get 5 million people to sign off on it. And it can sit on somebody's desk forever. Okay. Um, I know I deal with certain regulations and they come out about every 10 years because they start working on it after they get the last one published, and it takes them 10 years to they get it rewritten within the year, but then it takes another 9 years to get everybody to sign off and get it through because you're moving along, and then somebody says, "I don't like the way that sentence was," or "We should do this instead," and then you start all over and come back up again. You know,
well, Steve,
and
if we didn't do that, how would a lot of those bureaucrats
yeah,
justify their job in
yeah,
the
it's job security on a lot of people. Whether it makes sense or not is not important in these cases. It's a matter of, getting it through. So, yeah, and then they were able to get an emergency youth authorization. And the emergency youth authorization means that the trial showed that it was safe. In other words, they couldn't find anything devastating, and that it worked because the people they had were doing very well with not getting COVID, and even though they might be exposed to it. So, uh, yeah, it went faster, but a lot of that was one, the technology. They didn't have to wait around. That's another thing to look at. They can make the mRNA, okay, however they do it, they can make that artificially. If you develop a traditional vaccine, you have to grow out that vaccine, usually in an egg medium, and they use multi-millions of eggs, sometimes like 10, 100 million eggs to grow it, and then they have to spin it down. It takes time. They have to get all that stuff, and it takes a long time to just get the vaccine out on the traditional basis. Um, so the it doesn't take that long to produce an mRNA because it's being done with newer technology, and we aren't dependent on chickens and eggs.
So, all right. Uh, I want to backtrack a little bit to Patricia says hi, by the way.
Yeah, I could see her. Hi, Patricia.
He says hello. You can put those on if you want to hear them. So, I want to go back to this cancer treatment for it. How would that work? What does that look like?
In that case, for cancer treatment, you would develop an mRNA that would teach the cells to develop some type of response to the protein, say, if you were looking at melanoma, to a melanoma cancer, which would then attack that cancer. Exactly how, I don't know because I haven't spent enough time looking at it. But that would be the basic concept. Uh, so it could go after, it could recognize the proteins of that cancer and go after it.
Mm.
So I don't know, they call it a vaccine. I don't know whether you call it a vaccine or a treatment, but it's given like a vaccine. It'd be injectable, and you'd have stuff circulating in your blood to go out there and do that. So yeah, there's. I'm really hoping that they get that. I've had friends die of melanoma. I had melanoma, and we had to cut out a huge hunk of my skull, or the skin around there, to get rid of it all before it spread very far. Thank heavens that it kills people. If
It
we can with
does.
a vaccine that would do that, great.
Steve, I got a question about the transparency of the vaccine. With the government wanting to mandate this thing, is it possible for normal laymen's such as myself and Jared to go out there and read about the techniques and the recipes for these vaccines in complete transparency?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of that's fairly common. I won't say common knowledge, but it's available knowledge. If you want to start studying vaccines, you would have to look for the documents and the studies, and you have to be careful on studies. Um, so many of the studies today are so lousy that it makes me mad. Some of them that have been put out in this area, geez, I would have been thrown out of graduate school had I produced a study like that. And here they say, oh, look, this is a great study. This institution did it, and therefore it must be great. And I'm thinking, why did they even publish it? Because studies have they're very complicated, and they have to take in all kinds of variables, both dependent and independent variables. The way they have been doing studies since COVID has been they develop their idea of what the outcome of the study is and then try to improve it. And, at least in my day, I'm old fashioned, but we tried to disprove something, and you're constantly trying to disprove it, and that's how you found out new information.
Yeah, and that's where I think uh, some of our hard part is lately is that it seems like even if you have a question, there's a political football to be kicked. And
A lot of money be kicked, even within our educational institutions.
yeah, that is
And
true.
the grant money's going out. People talk about the drug companies, funding the certain things. I don't think that's as big a problem as the government funding certain things, and they seem to have lots of funds, at least in the last uh, decade or so. I don't know how long now, but I
I
never seen
the, I think
back.
the pharmaceutical company's biggest issue is in advertising. You know, they
Hmm.
probably spend as much in throwing commercials on the television as they do in, a substantial amount of R&D.
Yeah, they probably do. I come from an era where it was against the law to advertise these things, and it was a different story. Uh, of course, back then the drug companies tried to wine and dine us to convince us that whatever it was the best. Uh, we'd take their lunches and stuff and listen to them. Doesn't mean we did anything about it, but it was a free lunch, and that most of the time that's outlawed now. They can't do that, unfortunately. So you don't get wined and dined. I didn't know many people that technically took the bait, hook, line, and sinker from a drug company. Most of the professionals I knew were pretty professional. And they'd give the courtesy of a listen, and if there was something good there, they'd take it, and if it wasn't, they would reject it. But
Well,
nowadays, geez, there's money in it from the government,
well,
and that talks.
yeah, of course, and that could be why um, all these drug commercials are running on all of your internet and media platforms, which could be why, if the pharmaceutical companies are paying for commercials, why these platforms might get intimidated to, even if the drug companies don't come in and say, hey, don't run any competing thing, the media companies might get out ahead of that and try to stifle
It,
conversation out of that.
it could very well be. One would have to follow the money very carefully, and I'm sure they launder it very well so that you can't do much. But yeah, that's as good of a theory as any I've heard, and those types of things.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. All right, so um, we've had you on here for almost an hour and 45 minutes now. We don't want to eat up your whole night. We definitely want to thank you for coming on and talking to us frankly about this.
It was a great conversation, Steve.
It really was. And you brought level-headed knowledge. You didn't come in uh, you know come in raving on either side like a pulpit thumper. You came in
Right.
calm and collected.
Yeah. The main thing I really impress if there's people listening to us is, you know, don't get tied up on either side. Uh, look at take the politics out of it. I don't care whether you like Trump or you like Biden, forget them and get into the actual deal. Does the vaccine work? Yes. Does natural immunity work? Yes. Can they work together? Yes. Okay. Uh, there's, I just see too much on both sides. So this is they're making me take the vaccine, so therefore I'm not going to take it. Well, that's stupid. Uh, I can understand the gut reaction, but being made to take it is not in the equation as much as will it do me some good? If you need it, get it. If you already have natural immunity, you can wait it out for a while and maybe take it later or not take it at all, you know? But, you know, forget who's pushing it and who's not pushing it. Forget all the stupid stuff that's out there and just think it through a little bit. Look at the science. I know that's a overused term because most people aren't, even though they say that. And leave the politics and the special interest groups out of it.
How do we get politics out of science?
You just ignore it.
Well,
Okay.
but it's
I mean,
permeated.
politics is going to get into it, you know, like the mandatory vaccines and stuff. But people are fighting against it. Even states and the attorney generals are fighting against it. And I think in the end, it'll come out. You know, if we let people, if we teach people the right principles and let them make up their mind for their own body, I think we'll be okay. People are smart. You know, I've known lots of people that weren't going to get the vaccine because they were scared of it. But once they learned, you know, on their own, I never pushed them, but just learned from observation and all that type of stuff that, hey, you know, my neighbor didn't grow horns or a tail or anything like that, except for Patricia. But but then they started getting it, and we see a lot of people doing it for that reason, not because government said they have to have it. If you make it have to, you people aren't going to do it. You know,
Well,
it's
and also, I
natural
think
health behavior.
we'll see some quality of if they made it mandatory. We would, I think, I'm a firm believer that capitalism causes competition, and competition causes quality. And I
Right.
think if we made it mandatory, not immediately, but over time, we would see a lack of quality either in what it is,
Right.
how they deliver it, or the timing
Yeah.
or something else. We'd miss out
Yeah.
on something.
Yeah.
Whereas capitalism causes is
Well, you're always going to see there's going to be an improved version on all of these things as we learn more about it. And so, yeah, it'll work out. And there's always going to be my experiences on any vaccine or any treatment. Actually, it makes any sense at all. There's always there be 30 to 35% of the population that's they say no. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
it doesn't matter what.
yep. I got one last question. Now, this mRNA technology,
Yeah,
this is the first time that it's really been mass used, correct?
this is the first time that they have got anything.
Well, they just got funded, so
Yeah, to to be funded and then actually be approved. Okay.
So this might be a vehicle for, like you said, maybe cancer treatments,
Yeah.
or
This.
I
Yeah.
mean, it could
There's
be the
these
sky's the limit.
alone is doing 21. I don't know what the other companies are doing, but
Mm.
there's all kinds of treatments coming down the line. I've been saying all along that the mRNA, the people that originally developed it will probably in by 2030 or so get a Nobel Prize in medicine for the discovery if
So
they
we
can
might,
get things out. I think it's one of the biggest breakthroughs we've had.
well, and it's interesting where it can be a delivery system into the cell. I mean, we may see some bad things come of it, obviously, but I mean, this may be if they can come up with a let's say a cancer treatment that is less life destroying than what
Yeah,
we currently have.
yeah.
Imagine what that could do.
Yeah, an mRNA cancer treatment. Now, every cancer is different, so that it have to be, you know, for different cancers. But it would it would prime the body to itself to fight the cancers, the basic principle here. Instead of putting all these poisons in you that technically what you're trying to do is kill the cancer before you kill the patient. This would allow the patient's own body to put up its own defenses.
Mm. I want to see where I definitely want to see where that goes in the end. I'm still undecided on whether I'm going to get the vaccine. Like I said, I had the virus, and you know,
How long ago did you have it?
it's been almost a year.
Okay, you're still probably very good.
Yeah, and that all depends on me watching the world. You never know, it may mutate into King Kong, or it might mutate into.
Eventually, it will. It'll be like flu. It'll probably get weaker as time goes on. Delta is weaker, but it spreads faster, which is the normal pattern for a virus.
And we're hearing there's two more out there floating around in the.
Right, and I'm waiting to see. I don't see enough data on it to be able to make any intelligent decisions on it.
And I'm definitely now. I just want to finish out with this, and this is mostly for the listeners. I maybe I think the Second Amendment for this, but I am definitely I look across the world at what some other nations are doing, how they're reacting, including the one directly to our north, and I am very thankful I'm not in any of those, because the way their governments have overreacted in tyrannical matters has I think a tyrannical government is more deadly and something to be more afraid of than whatever we've seen out of the coronavirus.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for being forthright, honest. There's been a few comments in the sidebar, and I'll answer them as best I can. Or if they want to reach out to you further, would it be okay if we share maybe your email address with them if they want to ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you. It's refreshing to hear someone come at it calm.
I have no special interest one way or another, and I'm too old to care anyway.
All right.
If you want to read the comments on the YouTube channel, they're pretty entertaining. I won't lie.
Yeah, there's
especially Mr. Dot Connector there. He's got some good questions in the beginning. Oh boy, I wouldn't want to piss him off.
He's got some good questions throughout it. But then again, we didn't ask you to come on here either A, to defend the virus to complete frustration, or B, to get into general arguments. I got exactly what I hoped to get out of it, and that was someone to come on and further my education on this. I am a Luddite. I drag my knuckles, and you came on, and you didn't change my mind as it stands, but you gave me more information to chew on as my mind is made up.
And that's the principle: is give people the information, let them think it through, and they'll make a good decision for themselves. I don't go to either side. I've been thrown off groups on both the conservative and the liberal side, and I don't really care because they frustrate me to death. I just try to. I've been in healthcare for more than 4 decades, and that's what I do, and I try to bring it down to people, not anything else.
Well, thank you very much, and we better let Patricia say hi and bye.
I love you. See you.
You are
My
special.
favorite Santa Claus.
Yeah, but this was a very good chat, and I hope you have a very good night, and hopefully we get to talk again soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks
All
again,
right.
Steve.
Everyone, that was Steve. If you do want to ask him any questions, you can go ahead and shoot us
We'll
a
put his
message,
email
and we'll get
out there for you.
we'll get you in contact with him. Have a good week. Be safe. Again, this wasn't for you to change your mind. This was just kind of an informational thing, and take with it what you will. If you don't like the vaccines, I hear you and I understand. If you do like them already, I hear you and I understand. I caught the virus before there were vaccines. I don't know if my mind would be any different had I not. That's the big question. So,
And I'm sure I can speak for everyone on this show. We do not support a mandate to
Nope.
mandatorily jab someone with a vaccine. It is completely immoral for a country to do that to a resistant population. Even if it's life or death, it's still freedom of choice before security.
yeah, well, and I don't support the government on anything. Just straight up. Thanks again, Stephen. And someone said your contact information is the North Pole. That was in the
Yeah, you could do that, but my email works fairly well.
All right.
People won't get me on my phone because that's filtered only to my contacts. So
Yeah. Well, we won't give out your phone number. We'll just give out an email address. That way you don't get calls at midnight with someone.
again, it's filtered anyway. So
All right.
Unless you're a friend, it doesn't come through.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good week.
Thank you.